Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Billy was tied up in further ways than one as the night unfolded, not with ropes but with secrets, shifting commitment, and the unmistakable sense that his life was drifting toward dangerous home again, and it all began when Sally woke alone and set up his hastily scribbled note about going for a run, an inoffensive reason on the face but bone that incontinently set off every internal alarm she had. Because Billy Abbott was numerous effects but predictable and disciplined weren't among them, and the timing felt wrong, the tone felt wrong, and deep down Sally could feel that old familiar bite of treason creeping in, the same instinct that had saved her ahead and advised her now that Billy was hiding commodity significant, commodity that could blow back on both of them. Rather of defying him incontinently, Sally let the apprehension poach and summoned Audra Charles to society, choosing strategy over emotion. And as they sat across from each other with untouched drinks between them, Sally laid out her enterprises piece by piece, from the note to Billy's restless energy to the growing shadow of Cain Ashby swimming too close for comfort, and Audra heeded precisely, admitting that Sally's reservations made sense but also daring to ask the uncomfortable question of whether it would really be the end of the world if Billy slid back into his old prepossessions, particularly his obsession on Chancellor diligence, because history had proven that Billy was at his most driven, utmost alive, and utmost ruthless when he believed commodity important was being suspended just out of reach, while Sally scuffled with that possibility, away the consequences of Cain's pushes were formerly exploding, as an injured Nick Newman awaited on Cain's train with slightly contained fury, his leg palpitating, his tolerance absent, and the moment Phyllis Summers arrived with Cain, Nick unleashed weeks of pent-up rage, criminating Phyllis of designedly decimating Newman Enterprises and of hiding behind the reason of survival when she was really settling scores, and though Phyllis shot back that she merited a palm after the hellish time she'd endured, Nick advised her that Summer would be shocked when she learned the verity, that no defense would abolish the damage, but Phyllis refused to blink, induced she could smooth effects over and unintentional to back down now that she was so near, egging Nick to covenant with nipping intensity that he'd grind Phyllis and her so-called punk mate Cain into dust and enjoy every second of it. Cain, ever the opportunist, disentangled from the conflict the moment his phone buzzed with Billy's textbook, excusing himself under the guise of business and leaving Nick seething and Phyllis rattled as he rushed to meet Billy, who was staying at Crimson Lights, unfit to sleep and unintentional to stay until morning to hear what Cain had to say, because curiosity and temptation had always been Billy's topmost sins. And as Cain arrived, the air between them crepitated with implied history and untreated business, Billy cutting straight to the point by asking whether this covert meeting was meant as a warning or an offer, only for Cain to confirm it was the ultimate and calmly proposed commodity that hit Billy like a punch to the casket. Chancellor diligence, no strings attached, framed as a peace immolation and a chance to reclaim commodity Billy had lost, with Cain averring that if Billy was still interested, the occasion was his for the taking. Though time was a luxury Cain intended to grant, Billy tried to play it cool, averring he demanded time to suppose, but the verity was written all over his face, the old fire reigniting as he counted the exhilaration of power against the cost of trust, and when Cain agreed to give him until morning and sealed it with a handshake, neither man noticed Sally watching from hard, her worst fears solidifying into certainty as she witnessed the moment that would change everything. When Billy eventually returned, Sally did end desolate time on amenities, unleashing a grim grilling session that left him no room to redirect or lie, her questions sharp and precise as she deconstructed his every move, every vacillation, until Billy cracked and confessed that Cain had offered him Chancellor free and clear, a disclosure that transferred Sally's concern soaring because Billy formerly had enough troublemaker tendencies without Cain nudging him further down a minatory path. And now she had to defy the reality that the man she loved was standing at a crossroads that could destroy them both. Back on the train, Cain replied Phyllis and incontinently tasted her moping wrathfulness after Nick's battle, egging a tense discussion about Summer and whether Phyllis could truly repair the damage she was inflicting on her relationship with her children, and in a rare moment of calculated honesty, Cain offered her an out, explaining that he demanded someone completely committed to the Newman preemption and that if this adventure was worth the threat to her family, he'd understand, but Phyllis surprised him by doubling down, assuring Cain she was each in until the end and making it clear that the Newmans didn't scarify her, not presently. Meanwhile, Nick's physical pain imaged his emotional fermentation as he halted into the manse and collapsed onto the lounge, his injured leg screaming with agony as he popped capsules and murmured about demanding a cash soon, the insulation pressing in as he plotted to maintain control, and when he eventually got Summer on the phone, he prevaricated through gripped teeth about having a simple headache, though his grunts and labored breathing betrayed the verity, and as he told her he'd called about commodity important, preparing to reveal the agony unfolding at Newman and Phyllis's part in it, the stage was set for yet another explosion, because every secret, every treason, and every dangerous alliance was tensing around them all, leaving Billy tied up in temptation, Sally on high alert and forced into treason of her own to cover herself, Kane pulling strings from every angle, Phyllis embracing the chaos she helped produce, and Nick twisting under the weight of pain, capsules, and the knowledge that his family was about to fracture indeed further, all while the pledge of power impended like a loaded armament, ready to go off and take everything with it in one ruinous blast. Sally, she'll be suspicious of what Billy's up to. Sally will put Billy through a grilling session and eventually pry a concession out of him. It sounds like Billy will admit Kane set up a meeting with him, so that news should leave Sally on high alert. Billy has enough troublemaker tendencies without Kane pushing him indeed further down a minatory path, so Sally will have concerns. Nick Newman will pop capsules after slamming Phyllis Summers. Kane Ashby will also offer Billy Abbott Chancellor diligence, so then's what YNR suckers can anticipate. When Sally Spectra gets out of bed and spots Billy's note about going for a run, it'll set off some alarm bells. Sally will summon Audra Charles to society, where she'll offer updates on her rearmost reservations and enterprises. Audra will get why Sally would worry, but she'll also wonder if it'd really be so bad if Billy regressed to his former tone and his Chancellor preoccupation. Meanwhile, injured Nick will be staying for Phyllis and Kane when they return to Kane's train. Kane will compactly be part of the conflict, but he'll gusto off after getting Billy's textbook to meet. At Crimson Lights, Billy will admit he could ain't sleep and doesn't want to stay until morning to hear what Kane has to say. When Billy wonders if this meeting is about a warning or an offer, Kane will confirm it's the ultimate. Kane will contend Billy can have Chancellor no strings attached if he's still interested and will suggest it can be a peace immolation. Billy will need a little time to suppose about it, but Kane won't be willing to stay long. In the end, Billy will agree to give Kane an answer in the morning and will shake hands with him as Sally intelligencers hard. Sally will hurl a bunch of questions at Billy in the fate, so he'll confess that Kane just offered him Chancellor free and clear. Back on Kane's train, Nick will explode at Phyllis for her part in decimating Newman Enterprises. Since they'll always be connected through Summer Newman, Nick will feel like Phyllis is targeting her extended family. Phyllis will suppose Nick should know better than anyone that she deserves a palm after the time she's had. Nick will principally advise that Summer's going to be shocked with Phyllis, but she'll suppose she can smooth effects over and will refuse to back down. With that in mind, Nick will covenant to grind Phyllis and her punk mate Kane to smoke. In fact, Nick will suppose he's going to enjoy it. Subsequently, Kane will reconvene with Phyllis and sense that she's derangement after her battle with Nick. There'll be some talk about Summer and whether Phyllis will really be suitable to repair the damage. Kane will need someone who's married to this Newman preemption, so he'll give Phyllis the chance to back out now. Still, Kane will understand, if this adventure isn't worth risking Phyllis's relationship with her children. Phyllis will assure Kane that she's all in until the end and will make it clear that the Newmans do'n't scarify her. As for Nick and his injured leg, he'll be in a ton of pain throughout the entire occasion. By the time Nick hobbles in the manse and plops down on the lounge, he'll be in agony. Nick will pop capsules and murmur to himself about demanding a cash soon. After Nick gets Summer on the phone, he'll struggle to get through the call as he grunts and lies about having a simple headache. Nick will admit he called Summer about commodity important, so he'll presumably prepare to give her news on Newman's AI Agony and Phyllis's involvement. As the fallout from that night continued to ripple outward, the pressure only boosted, stretching every relationship thinner and binding everyone more tightly to choices that could no longer be undone, because Sally, though outwardly composed after Billy's concession, lay awake replaying every word, every look, every half-alternate pause that told her this wasn't just another impulsive scheme but the morning of commodity darker, commodity that could swallow Billy whole, and while he slept. Beside her, restless and grunting as if formerly scuffling with the weight of Chancellor diligence in his dreams, Sally goggled at the ceiling and made a quiet, ruinous decision that fidelity alone would not save either of them this time, meaning she'd have to betray Billy in her own way by keeping Kane near enough to cover, manipulate, and if necessary destroy his plans before they destroyed Billy. By morning, Billy awoke re-energized and distracted, formerly mentally drafting scripts. Where he reclaimed his heritage, brushed off Sally's moping questions with solace that he hadn't agreed to anything yet, and headed out under the pretense of clearing his head, ignorant that Sally was formerly several way ahead, texting Audra to dig deeper into Kane's fiscal pushes and still waking Adam Newman that commodity was brewing around Chancellor, because if Billy was being courted, also the offer was likely bait for a much larger trap. Meanwhile, Kane wasted no time applying pressure, transferring Billy a curt communication reminding him that morning had arrived and tolerance was wearing thin, and though Billy tried to stall, persuading himself he demanded clarity, his pride hummed with expectation as he imagined sitting at the helm of Chancellor again, rewriting his story, proving to everyone who ever misdoubted him that he could win without sabotaging himself. Yet beneath that confidence lurked the eating fear that Kane no way gave anything down. Without awaiting blood in return, across city, Phyllis, fueled by adrenaline and stubborn resoluteness, began strategizing her coming move in the Newman preemption, brushing off Kane's before offer to let her walk down and rather mapping out how to spin the narrative once the verity inescapably surfaced, because in her mind survival justified everything, indeed if it meant being painted as the villain yet again, and she told herself that formerly she won, once she eventually stood on top. Summer would understand. Indeed if her mission took time, Nick, still, was unraveling, the pain in his leg enhancing as the capsules dulled his senses but not his wrathfulness, and after hanging up with Summer, he sat in silence scuffling with the consummation that his family was under siege from every direction, his own body betraying him while adversaries and former abettors likewise circled, and as he goggled into the quiet manse, he made a private oath that no matter how broken he felt, he'd not let Phyllis and Kane strike the heritage his father erected without a fight. Back at society, Sally met Audra again, this time armed with new resoluteness rather than raw fear, and as Audra delivered primary findings that suggested at shell pots and shadow deals connected to Kane's unforeseen liberality, Sally's dubitation hardened into certainty that Billy's offer was nothing further than a switch meant to destabilize Chancellor and distract from the larger assault on Newman. And though Audra questioned whether Sally was overpassing by fitting herself so deeply into Billy's choices, Sally combated that love didn't mean eyeless faith, it meant guarding someone indeed when they didn't want to be saved, a gospel that Audra understood each too well. Billy, for his part, eventually met Kane again latterly that day, choosing a neutral position that felt safer but did little to ease the sense that he was walking into a captain's den, and when Kane pressed him for an answer, Billy dithered just long enough to remind Kane that trust had to go both ways, egging Kane to smile deliberately and assure him that Chancellor would be his to run singly, a clean slate, a chance to make commodity untouchable, and though Billy wanted desperately to believe it, he asked the one question that truly signified why now, why him, and Kane replied with a nipping honesty that he demanded chaos in certain corners while he conquered others, and Billy, with his history and his character, was the perfect storm. Those words dallied long after the meeting ended, following Billy as he walked down without giving a definitive answer, because for the first time he completely grasped that accepting Chancellor might mean getting an armament rather than a winner. While Billy scuffled with that consummation, Sally made her own bold move by requesting a private meeting with Kane, presenting herself not as an adversary but as a concerned mate, and when Kane, intrigued and amused, agreed, the discussion unfolded like a chess match, Sally venting her worries about Billy's stability and suggesting that pushing him too hard could boomerang, while Kane combated that insecurity was exactly what made Billy useful, and though neither admitted their true motives, both left knowing the other was dangerous and would need to be watched nearly. At the Newman estate, pressures burned when Adam brazened Nick about the fractures forming within the family, the discussion veering from business to treason as Adam suggested that Billy's name was surfacing in uncomfortable places, a disclosure that transferred a shaft of dread through Nick despite his wrathfulness toward Billy in the history, because he knew firsthand how fluently Billy could be manipulated when power was on the table. Phyllis, seeing the walls closing in, doubled down on her alliance with Kane, assuring him that she could handle Nick and any fallout with Summer, but intimately she began to crack, flashes of mistrustfulness surfacing late at night when she imagined losing her son's trust ever, and though she silenced that voice with pretenses and plans, it no way completely faded. As the days passed, Billy's vacillation came its own kind of answer, frustrating Kane and intimidating Sally, and when Billy eventually admitted to Sally that part of him wanted to say yes just to prove he could repel the darker impulses that formerly ruined him, Sally responded with brutal honesty, telling him that temptation didn't vanish just because intentions were good, and that Kane was counting on Billy's belief that he could handle it, a belief history had formerly disproven. Still, Billy asked for one further day, one further chance to weigh his options, and Sally agreed outwardly while inwardly preparing for damage control, because she could feel the timepiece ticking louder with every fleeting hour. That night, Nick suffered another shaft of pain and nearly collapsed while trying to stand, forcing him to defy the reality that his physical vulnerability imaged his emotional bone. And as he sat alone, clinging his phone, he batted calling Sharon or Victoria, anyone who might base him, but pride kept him silent, and rather he conducted his frustration into strategy, outlining a counterattack that would expose Phyllis's involvement and undercut Kane's influence before they could strike again. By morning, Kane made his final move, controlling Billy with the establishment deadline and reminding him that openings like this didn't come doubly, and as Billy stood there, torn between ambition and tone preservation, Sally watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she prepared to intermediate if necessary, knowing that whatever Billy chose would define not just his future but hers as well, because if he accepted, she'd have to decide whether to stand beside him in the storm or walk down to save herself. In the end, Billy asked for one final assurance, that Chancellor would not be used as a pawn in the Newman preemption, and Kane, with calculated ease, said yes, a pledge so smooth it transferred chills down Billy's chine, and as Billy jounced sluggishly, still withholding his final answer, the pressure reached a breaking point across Genoa City, with Nick readying his counterpunch despite the pain, Phyllis adhering to her defiance as mistrustfulness eroded at her resoluteness, Sally balancing treason and protection on a razor's edge, and Kane orchestrating it all with the confidence of a man who believed every piece was exactly where he wanted it, ignorant that indeed the most precisely laid plans could unravel when too numerous secrets collided, because in this game, fidelity was transitory, power was addicting, and the cost of one wrong move could be everything. The pressure that had been erecting for days eventually began to crack open, discovering consequences into every corner of Genoa City, and Billy felt at the moment he stepped outdoors, the weight of Kane's deadline pressing down on him like a physical force, because no matter how numerous times he told himself he was still undecided, the verity was that the choice had formally started reshaping him, stropping his instincts, reviving the familiar exhilaration of being wanted, demanded, and dangerously close to power again, and that consummation scarified him nearly as important as it excited him, especially when he caught sight of Sally watching him with that precisely neutral expression she wore when she was formerly bracing for disappointment. Kane, meanwhile, moved through the megacity with calculated calm, confident that every player was replying exactly as prognosticated, because Billy's vacillation was part of the temptation, Sally's hindrance was anticipated, and Nick's fury wasn't a complication but an accelerant, commodity that would push everyone into making Gadarene opinions, and yet indeed Kane undervalued how unpredictable despair could come. Once pain, pride, and love collided, Nick, still battling grim agony in his injured leg, eventually reached a breaking point when the capsule stopped dulling the pain and rather magnified his sense of insulation, leaving him drooped in the Newman living room gaping at family pictures that felt like allegations, monuments of a heritage he was failing to cover, and when Summer called back, concerned by his simulated voice, Nick abandoned his plan to soften the verity and rather laid everything bare, confessing the depth of the Newman AI disaster and Phyllis's part in aligning herself with Kane, and though Summer tried to stay composed, the hurt in her silence cut deeper than any cry could have, forcing Nick to defy the possibility that indeed if he won this war, he might lose his son's faith in the process. Across city, Phyllis felt the shift nearly incontinently, seeing that Nick had eventually crossed the line into open retribution, and while she tried to mask her apprehension with bravado when she met Kane again, averring she could handle whatever Nick threw at them, Kane noticed the cracks forming, the way Phyllis veered when Summer's name came up, the way her confidence flitted for just to alternate too long, and he reminded her that fear was the adversary of Palm, that mistrustfulness would destroy them briskly than the Newmans ever could, and though Phyllis jounced and agreed, a seed of resentment took root, because she refused to be treated like a disposable asset. Indeed, as she clung to the alliance she believed was her last chance at triumph, Sally, completely apprehensive that Billy was edging near to a decision she couldn't control, escalated her own strategy by still meeting with Adam Newman, laying out the pieces she'd gathered about Kane's pushes and Billy's offer, framing it not as gossip but as a warning, and Adam, ever attuned to power plays, incontinently honored the peril, not just to Newman Enterprises but to Billy himself. And though Adam had little love lost for Billy, he understood how fluently Kane could weaponize Billy's ambition, egging Adam to pledge he'd keep digging. Indeed, as he advised Sally that formerly Billy stepped over this line, pulling him back might be insolvable, Billy, ignorant of how numerous chess pieces were moving around him, set up himself face to face with his history when he ran into Victoria, whose cool scrutiny cut straight through his bravado, and when she suggested that his name was circulating in disquieting exchanges, Billy bristled defensively.